There are moments in life when you can clearly feel that something within you is shifting. A quiet strength is silently growing. Even though you cannot yet give it a name, you become calmer, deeper, and strangely enough, that very sense of peace unsettles others. Carl Jung believed that when a person's aura begins to rise, they do not only transform themselves, but also unconsciously stir the unhealed parts within other people. Tonight, I want to walk with you on that very journey, the journey of recognizing the subtle signs that your soul is expanding, growing stronger, and returning to its deepest true nature. As Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." If you have ever felt misunderstood, if you have ever made others uncomfortable even when you remained silent, if you have ever sensed the energy around you shift the moment you entered a room, perhaps that is not your fault. It may be a sign that your aura is rising, and in the next hour, we will listen, explore, and awaken that truth together. I want to begin very slowly with an image you may have already experienced. There are some people who simply walk into a room, say nothing at all, yet the entire atmosphere seems to change. You cannot explain it through logic, but you feel it very clearly, as if an invisible wave has just touched you. In the past, I used to think that was charisma, presence, or simply my own oversensitivity. It was only after reading Jung more deeply that I began to realize perhaps what we often call aura is not something mystical at all, but the way a person's inner world radiates into the space around them. What's interesting is that Carl Jung hardly ever used the word aura in the way modern spiritual culture does today. He didn't speak about colorful halos or glowing rings above someone's head. Jung spoke of the psyche, the whole inner life of a human being, including consciousness, the unconscious, the shadow, the persona, the archetypes, dreams, old wounds, and unnamed longings. But the deeper I listened, the more I realized this: wherever there is a soul, there is an energy field. And that energy field is exactly what we are vaguely trying to name as aura. I began to understand aura in a very Jungian way. It is not something added to who you are, but the totality of everything operating within you. What your conscious mind is thinking, what your unconscious is storing, whether your shadow is being denied or recognized, which archetypes are being activated in your life: the healer, the warrior, the wounded child, the teacher, the rebel. All of these do not exist only in your head. They radiate outward, Others may not hear them with their ears or see them with their eyes, but they feel them through a very primal sense. Jung once said something that stayed with me for a very long time. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In the past, I understood that sentence simply as a reminder to know myself. But the longer I live, the more I feel it also speaks about aura. When your unconscious has not yet been seen, it doesn't just control your life, it also silently colors the entire energy field you carry with you. A person full of fear who constantly denies that fear will have a very different aura from someone who is also afraid, but dares to look at it, dares to admit it, and learns to hold it with compassion. I began to realize that a person's aura is not the beautiful light they try to project outward, but the degree of honesty between their inner world and their outer expression. If the inside goes one way and the outside goes another, the energy field that radiates outward becomes chaotic, exhausting, and deeply uncomfortable, no matter how positive, pleasant, or strong they try to appear. On the other hand, someone who dares to live truthfully with what is happening within them, both the beautiful parts and the dark ones, often creates a very different feeling light, yet deep, calm, yet not cold, close, yet not invasive. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." To me, that line feels like an unofficial definition of where a strong aura truly comes from. You do not upgrade your aura by imagining yourself glowing. By endlessly repeating positive affirmations you do not yet believe. Your aura becomes deep and stable when you dare to sit with your own darkness, when you listen to the shame, the anger, the urges, and the insecurities you once tried to avoid. When that darkness is gradually acknowledged instead of being pushed into the depths, your energy begins to feel more whole, more unified. And from there, your aura changes, not because it becomes brighter, but because it becomes less divided. I once went through a period where all I wanted was to have a pleasant aura, to always appear positive, always smile, always say the right things, always do whatever it took for everyone to like me. On the surface, it may have looked fine, but deep inside, I knew I was trapped in the persona, the social mask Jung described. I smiled without truly feeling joy. I agreed while being full of resistance inside. I said it's okay while my body was tense like a drawn bowstring. The cost was this: I was exhausted, and those who stood near me were exhausted too. If there was an aura at that time, I believe it felt more like a wave of chaos than anything healing. It was only when I began to face my shadow, those parts I once believed I was not allowed to have, that I discovered something deeply paradoxical when I stopped trying to be good. I began to feel safer for myself and for others. When I could finally say, I am angry, I am afraid, I am jealous, I am weak, and I accept that. My body softened. My voice slowed down. My eyes became less defensive. And somehow, the space around me changed too. I no longer needed to force positive energy. Yet someone sitting next to me would say, "Being near you feels easier to breathe." That was when I truly understood, through Jung's lens, that aura can be understood as the psychological field of influence a person carries with them. It is how the inner unity or inner fracture is felt on the outside. When we live in conflict, denial, and war with ourselves, that field carries tension. When we slow down and learn to befriend the unconscious, the shadow, and the parts of ourselves we once tried to discard, that field becomes steadier, not because we are perfect, but because we are no longer pretending. I do not dare to claim with certainty that aura exists as a physical phenomenon that can be scientifically measured, but on a psychological level, I believe this every inner choice leaves a trace. Every time we choose honesty over pretense, we add a little more clarity to our energy field. Every time we dare to sit with pain instead of running from it, we loosen an invisible knot around the body. Every time we face the shadow without judgment, we bring a small light into our deepest layers. And all of this, though unseen by the naked eye, is still felt by others, sometimes very clearly. So when we speak of an aura growing stronger in the Jungian sense, I do not imagine a dazzling halo. I imagine a human being who is slowly becoming more truthful with themselves, less fragmented, less artificial, less hidden. A human being whose conscious and unconscious are learning to speak to each other instead of fighting. A human being whose light does not need to be blinding, but is steady enough to illuminate even their own dark corners without abandoning them. If tonight, as you are listening to these words, you find yourself wondering, what is my aura? Is it rising? I will not answer for you. I only invite you to observe, do you still have to pretend to be someone else, just to be accepted? Are you still as afraid of your inner darkness as before? Do you allow yourself to be weak, honest, and silent without secretly hating yourself? Perhaps those very questions are already the beginning of a new energy, field slower, deeper, and more real. A field of energy that Jung might smile at and call by the name he always returned to the self, the silent center of the entire psyche. When I began to understand aura through the lens of Jungian, an energy field formed from the entire inner psychological structure, I suddenly realized something I had never dared to name before. Once you become honest with yourself, your presence is no longer comfortable for everyone, and that is not your fault. It is simply the natural consequence of moving closer to who you truly are. From that realization, I returned more deeply to a line by Jung that I had once read in passing, but did not fully understand at the time. People will do anything to avoid facing their own souls. There are sentences that must pass through many years of living, many falls, many nights of silent sitting before we can truly hear them. This line stayed with me for a long time, and only when I observed how people reacted to me, both the gentle reactions and the harsh ones, did I begin to understand that the greatest fear human beings carry is not the darkness outside, but the dark spaces they carry within. And this is also the natural bridge between the previous part and this one. If aura is the rising of the authentic inner world, then the reactions of others become a mirror reflecting how ready they are to face themselves. I remember once attending a small gathering with a few old friends. Nothing special happened. Yet I could clearly feel a strange energy in the room. One person avoided my gaze. Another spoke faster and louder, as if trying to hide something. I simply sat quietly, listening, without imposing any pressure on anyone. And yet, my silence made them restless. At that moment, I thought I must have done something wrong. But the more I reflected through Jung's perspective, the more I saw this. Sometimes you don't have to do anything at all. Simply carrying your own truth is enough for that truth to become a mirror. And a mirror always unsettles what has been hidden. I realized that people are not afraid of you. They are afraid of the feeling of being seen, of having what they are not yet ready to admit be seen through. When your aura becomes steadier and clearer, it unintentionally exposes the fractures within them, what they have long avoided, the suppressed emotions, the unhealed wounds. The dust-covered mistakes suddenly rises before their eyes, not because you name it, but because your energy no longer participates in the shared game of pretending. Jung once said that everyone wears a persona to live within society, a mask constructed to be just likable enough, just acceptable enough, just safe enough. When you begin to live more truthfully, your own mask falls. But the interesting thing is this, their masks begin to tremble as well. And that is the moment that makes them uneasy. When I understood this, I stopped blaming myself for the strange reactions of others. I understood more clearly that many people are not accustomed to truth, not the truth about the world, but the truth about themselves. They are accustomed to directing their attention outward, chasing success, image, praise, and social roles. But when they encounter someone who has begun to turn inward, who has seen their unconscious, who has touched their shadow without fear, that person's journey naturally creates a powerful contrast. It is like entering a room filled with dust. You did not knock over any powder jar. You did not stir anything up. You only opened the door, but the light that enters makes every floating particle of dust visible. You did not create the dust. You only revealed it. I understood this more deeply when Jung spoke of the shadow and inner avoidance. People do not only avoid what is bad in themselves, they also avoid their vulnerability, their honesty, their unmet emotional needs, and the wounds they have never dared to face. When your aura becomes strong, in the Jungian sense whole, unified, integrated, you are like someone entering a conversation without a mask. Your lack of defensiveness becomes an unconscious invitation for others to look at themselves. And that invitation tends to make people anxious rather than comfortable. I have witnessed many times how others reacted to me in exaggerated ways without any clear reason. A confusing glance, a sharp comment, a sudden distance. At first, I believed I had done something wrong. But later, I saw clearly this was not a reaction to me, but a reaction to the part of themselves they were trying to escape. A strong aura does not mean you become bigger. Sometimes, it only means you become more real. But for those who live in avoidance, truth always carries the feeling of threat. And I say this not to judge or conclude anything about anyone. I was once like them too. I once avoided looking at myself. I once felt threatened by people who were too peaceful, too honest, too still. Looking back now, it was because I was not yet brave enough to listen to my own soul. What eased my heart the most when I studied Jung was realizing the reactions of others are not the measure of my worth. They are only the measure of how deeply they have encountered their own soul. The more real you become, the harder it is for what is false in others to remain standing. The brighter you become, the more clearly the darkness they have long hidden is revealed, and the more peaceful you become, the harder it is for the chaos within them to remain silent. They are not afraid of you. They are afraid of what your presence awakens within them. And when I understood this, my heart softened. I no longer blamed myself, and I no longer felt superior. I simply understood that each person is in a different stage of their journey back to themselves. Your aura is not a threat. It is only the light of someone who is learning how to live truthfully. As I gradually understood that many people were not truly afraid of me, but rather afraid of what my presence awakened within them, I began to ask myself, then, why do some people react so strongly, even when I do nothing at all? That question led me into a deeper layer of what Jung spoke about in human psychology, what he called projection. Jung once said a very simple yet haunting line: everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Everything that disturbs us about others can become a doorway back to ourselves. It sounds gentle, but if you truly live with that sentence, you begin to realize how painfully uncomfortable it can be. I came to see that most of the time, people do not look at one another with empty eyes. They look through an invisible projection screen. Onto that screen, they cast their fears, their wounds, their desires, their inferiority. They do not see you as you, but see you as something inside their own inner world. Someone who has been betrayed easily sees everyone as suspicious. Someone who has always been criticized easily believes everyone is judging them. Someone who has never allowed themselves to be strong will feel unsettled when they see you standing firm. I have stood on that side before. I used to feel uncomfortable around people who were too straightforward, because deep inside me was a child who always had to speak indirectly in order to be accepted. I used to feel irritated by those who dared to rest, dared to say, "I am tired now," because inside me lived a part that constantly forced itself to keep going. If I am honest, I must admit this before I understood projection. I, too, used other people as mirrors so I would not have to look back at myself. But then something interesting began to happen when your aura starts to grow stronger in the Jungian sense. That is, when you become gradually more honest, more present, less avoidant of your inner life. At that point, the projection screen of others begins to function less easily than before. I noticed this through very small moments. Someone would look at me for a while and then fall silent, as if words had left them. Someone else would be on the verge of judging, and then suddenly soften. Someone would try to draw me into a drama, but after a moment would quietly stop. I am not a saint, and I possess no supernatural powers. I simply learned not to enter the old game, not to rush to defend myself, not to rush to explain, not to rush into the role they unconsciously assigned to me. When your inner world becomes clearer, you become like a clean mirror, rather than a wall on which others can freely draw. They try to project onto you the image of the bad one, the abandoner, the judge, the arrogant one. But those images cannot stick, because your inner life no longer corresponds to those roles. So what happens? Those images are reflected back to them. And that is the moment when they lose their footing. In the past, they could easily hide inside their illusions. I suffer because of others. I am always the victim. I am good. It's just the world that is bad. When they meet someone who is equally chaotic, equally masked as they are, that game runs smoothly. But when they stand before someone who is trying to live truthfully, who is learning to take responsibility for their own inner world, suddenly that script becomes difficult to perform. Not because you lecture anyone, not because you are superior, simply because your energy field, what we call aurano, longer cooperates with projection. You no longer collude with the old story. You are not easily pulled into the role of the perpetrator in a tragedy they have already written. You also no longer rush to prove your innocence. You simply stand there, present, listening, without carrying someone else's emotions on your behalf. I came to realize that it is precisely this stability that makes many people uncomfortable. Because if they can no longer pour everything onto you, they are forced to turn back and face themselves. And as Jung said, people will do anything to avoid facing their own souls. They will do anything to avoid confronting their own soul, void, justify, attack, withdraw, blame, anything, as long as they do not have to sit in silence and ask, where did this pain truly begin within me? When I look at this with softer eyes, I blame others less. And I also blame myself less. I understand that projection is a very normal psychological mechanism. It is the unconscious trying to protect us from what we are not yet able to accept. But at the same time, I see clearly this when your aura begins to pierce through those layers of projection. You will become a kind of challenge to the defensive systems of others. Some people will choose to leave. Some will avoid you. Some will speak ill of you to protect their story. Some will grow quiet, and one day return and say, back then, I was angry at you, but now I understand more. all of these reactions may happen, and none of them are entirely right or wrong. They simply show that each person is standing at a different point on their journey of facing their own soul. What matters to me, and perhaps to you, as well as learning not to use aura as a weapon. When you realize that your presence can pierce through the projections of others, it is very easy for a new kind of pride to arise. I am more awakened. I am deeper. I see through them. But that, too, is only another layer of persona more subtle. What Jung seems to suggest, in the way I feel it, is not to stand above others, but to stand alongside them without losing your own center. I feel most at ease when I think of aura as a peaceful space that others may choose to enter or leave. If they enter and are willing to drop some of their projections, that is beautiful. If they are not ready, they may walk their path, and I will walk mine. I do not need to force anyone to look at themselves, nor do I need to shrink myself so they can continue living inside illusion. And perhaps this is the natural bridge between the previous part and this one. When you understand why others become uneasy in the presence of a strong aura, you begin to clearly see the mechanism of projection at work. From there, you no longer ask, why are they like this toward me, with bitterness, but rather, what within them is trying to be protected. That question does not instantly make the pain disappear, but it softens your heart. You are still allowed to keep distance. You are still allowed to protect yourself, but you do not need to carry additional hatred. Within that softness, your aura continues to grow not as a dazzling light, but as a small, quiet lamp, just enough to illuminate your inner world, and by chance, also reveal a little of the darkness in others. The rest is their choice, and it is also your freedom. In the previous part, when I spoke about projection and how a strong aura can pierce through the layers of illusion that others unconsciously construct, I realized something important. You cannot see the truth of another person if you have never seen the truth of yourself. And from that very point, my journey led me to a larger question. So where does the true source of a steady, grounded aura actually lie? The answer, for me, gradually became clear through years of colliding with life and dialoguing with myself. I realized that aura is not something you train yourself to have. It does not come from trying to appear positive, nor from affirmations you repeat in front of the mirror. It doesn't even come from meditation sessions where you force yourself to be empty while inside there are still so many unheard voices. A person's aura through the way Jung helped me understand it rises from very real, very raw, very human footsteps on the path of facing oneself. Jung once wrote, "There is suid without shadow, and no psychic wholeness without imperfection." I had read that line many times, but only when I sat face to face with the darkness inside me did I truly understand what he meant. Light is not something you add to yourself. Light is what is revealed when you stop running away from your own shadow. I know that deeply because I once ran. I ran from the anger I did not dare to admit. I ran from moments of shame, failure, and pain that I always tried to cover up. I ran from unpresentable desires that society taught me to hide. I even ran from the fear of my own power, the fear that if I became stronger, others would leave me. I lived for a long time in that running, believing that the faster I ran, the safer I would be. But in truth, the more I ran, the more fragmented I became. That was when I began to understand why my aura, or the energy I radiated, was sometimes beautiful and at other times chaotic. It depended on which part of myself I was living. From that day, the strong part, or the fearful one, the loving part, or the jealous one, the peaceful part, or the unhealed one. I was made of many fragments, and those fragments did not speak to one another. At that moment, I returned to Jung, and shadow work entered my life not as a theory, but as an invitation to look straight at the things I had long tried to avoid. I still remember one evening, sitting alone in my room under a very dim light, feeling anger towards someone so intensely that I could hardly breathe. Normally, I would have avoided that feeling. I would have distracted myself with work, with social media, with meaningless conversations. But that night, I decided to stay. I sat still. I wrote down what made me angry. Then I asked it, "What are you trying to tell me?" And unexpectedly, the feeling was no longer as terrifying as I had imagined. It was simply an old wound, asking to be acknowledged. I realized that shadow work is not a battle with darkness. It is like opening the door for an abandoned child to come back home. That child may be loud, stubborn, even chaotic, but it is a part of you, and it does not disappear, no matter how hard you try to drive it away. As I gradually opened the door to those dark fragments, those parts I once believed were not allowed to exist, something strange happened. I became softer, yet also stronger. I became calmer, but not weaker. I became more straightforward, but no longer sharp like a weapon. My aura, as I felt it, became less dazzling and more warm. It no longer swung between extreme light and extreme darkness as before, but became more unified, more coherent, like a stream that no longer splits into multiple branches. And the beautiful thing was, I did not create it deliberately. Jung said that the unconscious wants only one thing to be seen. When the broken pieces inside me began to be heard, they no longer tried to sabotage me. They quietly returned to their place, as if all they needed was to know that I no longer denied their existence. And when my inner world began to reconcile, my energy naturally changed as well. No more sharp edges, no more fragmentation, no more unnatural fluctuations. I came to understand more clearly that a strong aura is not a positive aura. A strong aura is a whole aura. The more a person denies themselves, the more fragmented their aura becomes. The more a person faces themselves, the more consistent their aura grows. Aura does not reflect the most beautiful parts of you. It reflects the degree to which you have accepted the parts of yourself that are not yet beautiful. I want to reconnect this with the previous part, so everything flows together. If a strong aura can fade the projections of others, it can only do so when you are no longer projecting onto yourself, when you no longer blame the darkness within you. That darkness no longer becomes distorted into warped images cast onto others. You become clearer, more honest, and in that honesty, your aura becomes strong enough to make others recognize the parts they are still refusing. I share this not from the position of someone who has reached the destination, but from the position of someone who is still learning, day by day, how to return to themselves. And I deeply feel this: a strong aura is not a reward for those who are perfect. It is a reward for those who dare to be imperfect, who dare to descend into the darkness, who dare to recognize that within every person there are fragments waiting to be gathered back into an embrace. If tonight, as you listen to these words, you feel something stirring within you, old pain, an uncomfortable memory, an emotion you buried long ago, be gentle with it. You do not need to heal it immediately. You only need to stop running. You only need to sit with it for a moment. That is the first step of a rising aura reconciliation with the part of yourself you once believed you had to hide. Within that darkness, you may glimpse a very small light, and perhaps that light is you, your most whole version, waiting to be recognized. When I understood that a truly strong aura is born from reconciliation with the shadow, from descending into the deepest dark layers within, to look back at every fragment of myself. I began to observe the outer world with different eyes, and I realized something I had never considered before. Other people do not respond to you only with their personal emotions. Sometimes they respond with something more ancient, deeper, beyond their individual life. I remember once, after a long period of working with the darker parts of myself, I felt my inner world settle in a very strange way. It was not a forced peace, but a kind of peace that comes from no longer needing to run. When I appeared at a gathering, a friend looked at me and said, "You seem very different today, like deeper." I laughed, thinking it was just a casual remark. But that night, sitting alone, I realized it was the effect of Arabut at a deeper level, the level Jung called the collective unconscious. Jung once wrote, "The collective unconscious consists of the sum of the instincts and their correlates, the archetypes." And when I read this, I understood that people do not respond only to the me of the present, but also to the archetypal symbols that my aura unconsciously awakens within them. I began to realize that, at a certain level, a strong aura can touch ancestral memory, the kind of memory each person carries but cannot name. And in those strange moments, people respond to you not as they would to an individual, but as they would to a symbol. I have witnessed this even when I said nothing at all. A gaze directed at me carried a caution that did not belong to the present moment. A sentence they uttered sounded like the defense of some instinctual layer within them. At times, they liked me instantly, without knowing why. At other times, they felt stimulated, challenged, threatened, even though I did nothing but be present. When I listened more deeply, I realized this was when the archetypes inside them were being awakened. A strong aura, in the Jungian sense, is like an invisible bell. Not everyone can hear this bell, but those who do often respond in a deeply instinctual way, and that response comes from the archetypes living within each person, ancient patterns that existed even before language. Sometimes, your aura awakens the sage within them, the seeker of truth. Then they look at you with respect, or with a curiosity that longs to learn, as if there is something in you they have long forgotten. Sometimes, your aura touches the warrior, the primal defender of the safe zone. Then they may react strongly, defensively, or feel that you are a threat to their worldview, even when you have no intention of attacking. There are also moments when your aura brings the healer to life. They feel at ease simply being near you, not because you heal them, but because the peace within you reminds them that healing is real. At times, a strong aura awakens the rebel within them. They feel stirred, as if your inner freedom makes them want to break the long-standing barriers they built for themselves. But it can also confuse them, because they are not yet ready to live as truthfully as you do. And there are moments when you unconsciously summon the seer, the one who sees beyond the surface. Those who carry this archetype often sense very quickly whether you are a companion or a challenge. They are not deceived by appearances, and sometimes they are the ones who see your aura most clearly. When I understood this, I suddenly became more patient with the world. I realized that people respond to me not only because of my personality, but because deeper layers within them are being stirred. And this helped me hurt less, be less surprised, and feel less lost. I understood that their reactions do not fully belong to the present. To keep everything flowing between part 4 and this one, I want to add this. If shadow integration helps you become more whole inside, then it is that very wholeness that creates a kind of energy that cannot be ignored. And that energy, coherent, clear, peaceful, has the ability to touch the collective unconscious of the people around you. It is like an ancient signal their souls recognize, even if their rational minds have not yet caught up. I am not saying this to mythologize aura. I am only describing very real experiences I have lived through. And also what Jung suggested throughout many of his works: human beings do not live by consciousness alone. We carry within us the history of humankind memories, instincts, images that sometimes need only one correct frequency of energy to be awakened. And when that happens, you will witness completely different reactions. One person sees you and feels light. Another looks at you and feels uneasy. One wants to come closer. Another wants to stay away. One feels inspired by you. Another feels that you are a reminder of what they have not yet dared to face. All of those reactions are valid for them. And I learned an important lesson. Your energy is not meant to be understood by everyone. It is meant to resonate with those who are walking a similar path. When a strong aura causes others to react instinctively rather than rationally, that is not chaos. It is ancient memory stirring. It is the archetype speaking. It is the deepest layer of the human being seeking to connect, to protect, or to awaken. And I believe that when we understand this, we become gentler with the reactions of others that we cannot explain. Because sometimes they are not reacting to you at all. They are reacting to their own primordial story that has just been awakened. As I came to understand more clearly how a strong aura awakens the layers of the collective unconscious within others, I began to see another truth naturally reveal itself to truly touch the collective unconscious. You must be yourself, not the version society wants, not the role you have worn for many years, not the perfect image you try to construct, but simply you, with an honesty that is sometimes awkward, sometimes imperfect, sometimes still trembling. And from that realization, I moved into the next part of this journey, authenticity, and its quiet, yet immense power. I came to realize that among all the things that can provoke reactions in others, nothing is more powerful than a person who dares to live truthfully. This is not outward boldness. It is not the kind of "I'll just be myself, take it or leave it" attitude that social media glorifies. It is a very quiet, very humble, very inward kind of truthfulness, one that is born from the stages where you face your shadow, when you no longer pretend to be stronger than you are, better than you are, or more likable than you truly are. And it is precisely this truthfulness that becomes a challenge to the world around you. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For me, this sentence is the most quietly powerful declaration a human being can carry. But in order to become yourself, you must face a difficult truth. Society is not designed to welcome those who are deeply authentic. I realized this through very small and sometimes very painful moments. When I began to speak honestly about my feelings instead of forcing a smile, some people became uncomfortable. When I began to set boundaries instead of constantly pleasing everyone, some people disappeared. When I stopped offering praise just to satisfy others, they grew confused. When I quietly did what I believed was right, instead of trying to resemble the crowd, my silence suddenly became a threat. I once believed that I must have done something wrong. But later, as I understood more about the persona, the social mask Jung described, I realized something simple yet profound. In a world where most people live through their persona, authenticity is always seen as an act of rebellion. Not because you are fighting anyone, not because you are deliberately breaking rules, but because your very existence exposes what others have been trying to hide for a very long time. On an unconscious level, people are accustomed to light conversations, polite compliments, nods meant to preserve harmony, familiar roles that help them feel safe. When you enter life with an energy that is no longer fragmented, no acting, no running away, no embellishing, you inadvertently become a mirror, reflecting the artificiality they once believed they hid so well. Not everyone is ready to look into that mirror. I still remember clearly a conversation with an old friend. When I said that I no longer wanted to live according to other people's expectations, she was silent for a long time. Then she said one sentence that stayed with me. "You're saying the things I've never dared to think." In that moment, I realized that sometimes your authenticity is not a declaration about yourself. It is a reminder of the choices others have not yet dared to make. This helps me naturally bridge part 4 and part 5. You cannot awaken archetypes in others if you yourself are still hiding behind your persona. Authenticity is the signal that awakens the most primal parts of the human being. And because authenticity is rare, it is also unsettling. Jung spoke extensively about the split between persona and self. The persona is created to help us survive in the world, to fit in, to be liked, to be accepted. But the persona is not who we are. It is only a garment. And if you live too long inside that garment, you forget what your own skin ever felt like. When you begin to live truthfully, even in the most clumsy first steps, you remove those layers one by one. And at that very moment, the system that is accustomed to pretense begins to shake. Others are not reacting to you. They are reacting to the truthful part of you, the part they have buried within themselves. I have seen people grow colder as I grew more authentic. I have seen them become more defensive when I no longer took part in criticism or comparison. I have watched some people distance themselves from me simply because I no longer played the game where everyone has to keep everyone pleased. And I once believed that authenticity made me lonely, but one day I realized the opposite truth. Authenticity does not make me lonely. It simply filters out the relationships that no longer align with my true nature. And the most beautiful thing is this: when you dare to be authentic, you do not only awaken archetypes in others, you awaken archetypes within yourself. There are days when I feel like the sage, looking back on life as a necessary sequence of lessons. There are days when I become the warrior, daring to protect what matters, even as my hands still tremble. There are days when I become the healer, learning to embrace old wounds. There are days when I turn into the rebel, daring to break the structures that once imprisoned me. And sometimes I am simply the seer, the one who sees what I once deliberately refused to see. Authenticity opens that door, and because of that, it becomes a force that disrupts social structure not through conflict, but through its very natural existence. You don't need to shout. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to compete. The simple fact that you do not live falsely is already the most powerful rebuttal to a world that glorifies beautiful masks. In the end, I realized one truth that made my heart feel very light. Authenticity does not make you stand against the world. It only makes you stop standing against yourself. And when you stop standing against yourself, your aura rises in a very quiet, very steady, very natural way, like the light of a candle that does not try to shine, yet is still enough to change the entire room. As I gradually came to understand that authenticity is not an act of opposing the world, but a reconciliation with myself, I also began to notice the next truth naturally emerging when you live more truthfully. Others begin to react to you in ways even they cannot explain, as if they sense something before their rational mind has time to interpret it. And from here, I step into the next part of this journey, the first sign of a strong aura, the unconscious reactions of others to even your silence. I remember one moment in my life very clearly. In a gathering, I simply sat there, speaking very little, almost just observing. And yet, one person became uneasy when they looked into my eyes. Another spoke faster than usual, and someone else grew strangely silent, as if they had suddenly forgotten what they were about to say. At first, I thought I must have done something wrong. A gaze that lingered too long, a smile at the wrong moment, a sentence lacking tact. But then, when I settled into myself, I realized sometimes you do nothing at all. You simply are present. Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." And I believe this is not only true of the great encounters in life, but also of the smallest moments: a glance, a smile, a stretch of silence, a presence with clear energy, a coherent, unified aura acts like a catalyst that sets the unconscious layers within others into motion. I once asked myself, why does someone grow restless standing beside me? Why do they avoid my gaze? Why do they stumble over their words when they are normally very confident? Why do they grow quieter when I enter the room? And I came to realize that the answer does not lie in me, but in them, more precisely, in their unconscious. When you step into a stage of living more truthfully with yourself, your aura is no longer scattered. It becomes concentrated, still, deep. And that depth is felt immediately by the defensive layers of others. I have witnessed these subtle reactions so many times that I began to recognize a pattern Those who carry many unresolved matters within them tend to react most strongly to my silence. Not because silence is frightening, but because in that silence, they cannot find a place to hide. The truth is very interesting. You do not see through them. They feel themselves being seen. This is a subtle but important difference. I do not possess the ability to see through anyone. But when I live more truthfully, I no longer participate in role-playing or artificial social exchanges. That stillness is like turning off all the noise, and precisely because of that, their own inner voice becomes clearer to them. The confusion they feel does not come from me, but from the inner emptiness they are not accustomed to facing. I have been in that position myself. I have encountered people with very strong auras, not strong in the sense of power, but strong in the sense of depth, and I once avoided their gaze. I once spoke faster. I once felt my heart waver slightly, without knowing why. Later, when I looked back with honesty, I understood that at that time, their presence had awakened a part of me I was not yet ready to touch. So when others appear awkward in the presence of your silence, do not be too quick to assume it is something negative. Sometimes, it is simply a sign that they are seeing themselves more clearly, and that clarity leaves them unsettled. A strong aura is not something you hold in your hands and display to others. It is something others sense instinctively. And instinct, according to Jung, always reacts to truth before the rational mind has time to explain it. Many people have told me that I seem quiet, hard to read, very peaceful, or strong in a silent way. But I know that these are not personality traits. They are their reactions to a part within me that has stopped rejecting itself. This brings me back to an important lesson Jung emphasized. We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. In your presence, they suddenly encounter themselves not through words, but through a sensation that is difficult to describe, both attracted and unsettled at the same time. Your strong aura is like someone opening a window in a room where they have grown accustomed to living in darkness. The light is not the problem. The change is the problem. There are moments when I see this very clearly. An old friend cannot hold my gaze when I ask, "Are you really okay?" A colleague hesitates when I simply listen in silence instead of agreeing, just to keep the peace. A family member suddenly changes the subject when the conversation touches something they have been avoiding. It is not that I make them uncomfortable. The truth within them is stirring. And this does not make me proud, nor does it make me sad. It only makes me more compassionate. I understand that people respond according to how deeply they have encountered their own soul. I understand that not everyone is ready to look into the mirror that my aura unintentionally creates. And I also understand that the silence of someone who has reconciled with themselves is very powerful, sometimes so powerful that others feel themselves grow smaller in its presence. I share this gently because I know that any true strength is never accompanied by display. The strongest auras I have ever seen have always belonged to people who are deeply present, deeply authentic, and deeply at peace with both their light and their shadow. And perhaps this is the natural bridge between the previous art and this one, when you live more truthfully. Your aura does not only change you, it changes the way others respond to your very existence. And the first, clearest reaction is their unease in the face of your silence. When I began to realize that my silence alone was enough to make some people feel awkward, avoid my gaze, speak faster, or suddenly fall quiet, I understood that this was the first sign my aura was touching something deep within them. But then, as I observed more closely across many relationships and many different living spaces, I saw something even deeper. It was not only a momentary tremble, but the way they treated me over time also began to change. And there, my aura began to become a mirror. And when you unintentionally become a mirror for another person's unconscious, the next reactions begin to appear. I noticed a very particular kind of person appearing around me. They are both drawn to me and uncomfortable with me at the same time. They like the way I think, the way I see things, the peace or the depth that I carry. They come to confide in me, to ask for advice, to be listened to. But at the same time, sometimes in their eyes, there is something hard to name, a hint of envy, a hint of comparison, a hint of inferiority. In the past, I was deeply confused by this. Later, when I understood Jung and the shadow more clearly, I gradually realized sometimes people are not admiring you at all. They are admiring the version of themselves that they see through you, the version they have not yet dared to become. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And I think that, at some level, when your aura begins to grow unified, deep, and real, it makes others unconsciously feel that there is a part within them that also wants to be that way, to be deeper, to be more real, to live more truthfully. But the fear of rejection, the fear of judgment, the fear of losing old relationships keeps them stuck. So they stand between two opposing forces, one that pulls them toward you, and one that wants to resist you. That tension, when it remains unconscious, very easily becomes envy. I once had someone say to me, "I really like the way you think, but sometimes I feel uncomfortable around you, and I don't even know why." In the past, that made me sad. Now I understand more. It's not that I am the problem, and it's not that they are bad. It is simply that my aura touched the place they want to live from, but have not yet dared to. Then there is a second kind of reaction that I gradually began to see clearly. Over time, other people begin to use me as a place to set down their pain. They are irritated, hurt, angry at someone, at life, at themselves, but because they do not dare to face it directly, they unconsciously redirect it toward me. One ordinary sentence of mine, one very normal decision, suddenly becomes the perfect excuse for them to release emotions that have been accumulating for a long time. Once, I simply said, "I need a little space for myself," and the other person reacted as if they had been abandoned, betrayed. They accused me of being cold, indifferent, distant. At that time, I condemned myself deeply. But later, when I looked back calmly, I understood that this anger was not actually for me. It was anger toward the moments when they had failed to protect themselves, the moments when they had truly been abandoned in the past. I was simply the most convenient projection screen. Jung once reminded us that we often encounter ourselves along the path of life under thousands of disguises. And when your aura becomes clearer, you unintentionally become one of the places where others deposit the parts they do not dare to hold. They blame you for their feelings, while far beneath the surface, those are feelings they have carried long before you ever appeared. This leads to another sign that I believe many people with strong auras have experienced. Strangers tend to react to you in two extremes. Either they open up very quickly, or they want to attack, diminish, or challenge you. There is very little neutral ground. Some people, after meeting me just once, have told me things they have never told anyone before. They say, "I don't know why, but with you, I can talk about these things." I smile, not because I think I am special, but because I understand this. The aura of someone who has learned to accept their own darkness creates a sense of safety for the darkness of others. They feel permitted to be themselves. But on the opposite side, there are also those who almost immediately place themselves in opposition to me. They attack what I believe. They mock what I value. They test my boundaries to see whether I will collapse. For a long time, I was exhausted by this type of reaction. Later, I realized for some people, your very existence is already a question directed at how they are living. If they are not ready to look at themselves, the easiest way is to attack you. At this point, perhaps the fourth sign begins to emerge clearly. You are often labeled as too much, too sensitive, too deep, too serious, too different, too hard to understand. Everything about you seems to go beyond the just enough that the crowd feels comfortable with. In the past, I was terrified of being called too much. Every time someone said, "You overthink too much," "You're too sensitive," "You're too intense," I would shrink myself, speak less, smile more, become shallower, lighter. I retreated into my persona in order to be accepted, but the more I did that, the more I felt myself drifting away from my true nature. Later, as I read Jung and observed myself, I suddenly understood people call you too deep only because they have grown accustomed to living on the surface. They call you too sensitive only because they have shut down their emotional channels for too long. They say you are too much only because they have reduced themselves to too little. I am not saying this so that we place ourselves above anyone. I am only saying this if your aura becomes a mirror for the unconscious. Then receiving extreme reactions is natural. There are souls who thirst for authenticity, and they will be strongly drawn to you. That is admiration and resonance. But there are also parts within human beings, within themselves, that fear truth, and those parts will resist you. When I understood this, I began to see everything with softer eyes. I no longer became overly elated when someone loved me, nor overly devastated when someone misunderstood me. I began to see every reaction as a message from the unconscious of them, and sometimes of myself. And perhaps this is the natural connection between the previous part and this one. If the first sign of a strong aura is the confusion of others in the face of your silence, then the next sign is how they continue to react to you once the mirror inside them has truly appeared. Admiration and envy, closeness and blame, opening up and attacking, labeling and distancing. All of these, even when they hurt us, are not necessarily a verdict upon you. They are simply signs that your aura has begun to do what it is meant to do, to truthfully illuminate the inner world yours, and the inner world of those who happen, by chance, to pass through your life. As I began to understand that my aura could become a mirror for the unconscious of others, where they see both the part they long for and the part they avoid. Gradually became aware of an even deeper layer. Not only do people change when they are near me, but the surrounding atmosphere itself also shifts. It was then that I truly felt something I had once heard only as a metaphor. The energy within us does not stop at the surface of the skin. It flows into the space we step into. I used to think that phrases like, "when you walk in," "the whole atmosphere changes," were just words people said for fun. But the more slowly I lived, the more carefully I listened, the more I realized there are rooms that are very noisy before you arrive, and suddenly settle when you appear. There are conversations that begin with small talk about the weather, and suddenly turn toward questions that are very real, very deep. There are groups of people who quietly drift away when you come near, as if you and they are moving on two very different frequencies. In the past, I thought that was just personality. Now I see it as the trace of aura. I remember once stepping into a crowded gathering. Everyone was laughing loudly, exchanging very ordinary stories. When I arrived, I didn't say much, just greeted everyone and found a quiet place to sit. After a while, the conversation shifted to topics no one had intentionally proposed, such as, "Are you really okay these days?" Or, "Do you feel you're living in alignment with what you truly want?" No one said, "Let's go deeper now." Yet, in a very natural way, the conversation slid to a deeper layer, like standing by the edge of a river, and suddenly finding yourself wanting to follow the current. When I went home that day, I thought about it for a long time. I realized that I had made no effort to steer or redirect the topic. The only thing I had brought with me was a genuine readiness to be truly present in that room, without a mask, without trying to seem happier than I was, without trying to say what would please everyone. And somehow, that presence alone was enough to change the atmosphere. Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And I think, on a very ordinary human level, when there is someone in the room who has begun to choose awakening, who dares to look honestly at themselves and dares to live truthfully, the space itself also carries a very gentle invitation. Do we want to be a little more honest with one another? I began to realize that when your inner aura becomes steady and still, you don't need to force conversations to go deeper. You only need to be present with honesty. And those who are tired of pretense will naturally find their way toward deeper subjects. They feel as though this is a rare chance to speak what they truly think and truly feel, without being judged. And so the conversations suddenly go deep, even though you never scripted them. But this also has its other side. When your aura begins to clearly influence the atmosphere around you. Those who are accustomed to living only on the surface will feel uncomfortable, not because you are bad, but because the depth of your energy makes them feel as though they are being pulled into waters they are not yet ready to swim in. I began to notice that in some groups of friends, those who like shallow talk, gossiping about others, and laughing just to pass the time would gradually appear less when I was present. Not necessarily because of conflict, simply different frequencies. In the past, I felt very sad when I saw people slowly growing distant from me that way. I thought something was wrong with me. I asked myself, am I too heavy? Do I exhaust people? Later, when I observed more carefully, I came to a much gentler understanding. There are souls who do not yet want to live deeply, and that does not make them bad people. It only means that they and I are walking different paths. Your aura does not fit into every room, and that is normal. From there, I also began to see more clearly an interesting phenomenon. Some people meet me and later say they feel recharged, lighter, more peaceful. But others meet me and say they feel drained, pulled into too much introspection, mentally tired. In the past, this confused me. Now I understand that this does not fully speak about my value, but about resonance or the lack of it between energetic states. There are days when I carry very still energy, slow, deep, quiet, but attentive. Those who are at a stage of needing to pause, to reflect, to turn inward, will feel in tune. It is as if they are given oxygen for the soul. They feel less alone in their inner journey. On the other hand, those who are trying to keep themselves constantly busy so they do not have to feel too much will feel tired around me. Because my stillness makes the noise within them harder to ignore. Jung spoke of how each person carries their own individual process, and I think that is very true here. The space you carry with you, the energy you radiate is not always suited to those who are trying to escape themselves. To them, you are like a room that is too quiet, and in that quiet, the things they fear most begin to speak. So when you walk into a place and the atmosphere changes, some people suddenly speak more deeply, some leave, some feel lighter, some feel more exhausted. Do not rush to label yourself as good or bad. Simply observe your aura is now strong enough to touch not only individuals, but also the invisible field of that space. And each person in that field will respond according to where they stand on their own inner journey. Continuing from the previous part, where you saw your aura become a mirror for the unconscious of others. Here, you can see even more clearly that mirror is not placed only in front of each person. It is also suspended in the middle of the room. It causes the whole atmosphere to change. What is false will find it hard to breathe. What is searching for truth will feel invited. Those who are ready to live deeply will move closer. Those who wish to remain on the surface will naturally withdraw. And in all of these movements, you do not need to do anything dramatic. The only task, and also the hardest one for you, remains exactly what Jung always reminded us: to continue becoming yourself. To be a little more honest with your inner world each day. The rest, your aura will take care of, not so that you can control others, but so that you may live in alignment with the frequency of your own soul, in the spaces that know how to honor that. As I gradually realized that simply stepping into a space was enough to make the atmosphere change. Some people felt lighter. Some felt more exhausted. Some grew quiet. Some suddenly wanted to speak more deeply. I understood that this was a sign my aura had begun to touch the surrounding environment. But there was another phenomenon that repeated itself so often that I was forced to face it directly alongside those who felt recharged in my presence. There was always another group of people who were also drawn toward me, but not to heal together, rather to cling to that light. And that was when I had to confront an uncomfortable truth: when your aura grows stronger. It is not only awakening souls who are drawn to you, but also those who are living in illusion, manipulation, or unhealed wounds. At first, I did not recognize this. I only saw myself repeatedly falling into very strange relationships. I gave a great deal, listened endlessly, supported constantly, tried very hard, and in return, I felt drained, used, or made to feel guilty whenever I dared to think about taking care of myself. These people were not always bad in any obvious sense. They did not necessarily have to be abusers, villains, or deceivers. Sometimes they were simply souls that were too wounded, too empty, to the point that they latched onto any light they could see. And if you are a source of light, it is very possible that you will become a target. Jung once said something that feels especially true in this context. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For many people, sitting alone with their own shadow is so frightening that they cannot do it by themselves. But instead of finding the courage to face it, they unconsciously choose another path, clinging to someone who makes them feel safe, warm, understood, and then demanding that person remain their home forever, while they themselves refuse to rebuild the home within. I began to see that some people were drawn to me not because they truly know me, but because they sensed a light they had not yet been able to build for themselves. They wanted to be close to that feeling of peace, that depth, that understanding, that listening, but instead of letting it inspire their own inner journey, they wanted to possess it. Not being near you teaches me how to look back at myself, but stay here so I never have to look back at myself. This is a painful but crucial distinction. I had been bound in relationships like this for a very long time. At first, I was moved when someone trusted me enough to reveal their deepest wounds. I felt useful, valuable, almost like a healer in their eyes. But over time, I began to realize that something was wrong. Everything always returned to them, their pain, their needs. Meanwhile, my pain, my limits, my exhaustion, my need to be heard seemed to have no place. I began to understand that some people do not come to walk alongside you on the path of inner growth. They come because they need a life preserver. And when you become the life preserver for too long, you forget that you, too, need the shore. Jung once said, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, there love is lacking." In relationships where toxic energy appears, I always see these two together, a hunger to be loved, intertwined with a need to control and possess. They love being listened to by you, yet they use their pain to bind you in place. They love your light, yet they fear that you might become strong enough to leave. And so, slowly, love is replaced by dependence. When your aura is bright, you are like a lamp in the night. Those who are searching for their path feel grateful for that light. They use it to see the ground beneath their feet more clearly. And then they continue on their way. But there will also be those who fear the darkness so deeply that they refuse to learn how to walk, and instead want only to cling tightly to the lamp even if doing so slowly drains it of light. The hardest lesson for me was learning not to see myself as a savior deep within my unconscious. I once believed if I am good enough, patient enough, loving enough, I can heal them. And then I realized that was my own illusion. I am only a human being learning how to heal myself. I can walk beside someone, but I cannot walk in their place. I can illuminate, but I cannot live for them. If I try to do that, I do not save anyone. I lose myself. I lose even the aura I had struggled so hard to build from within. Continuing from the previous part, where a strong aura changes the environment, drawing the right people closer and allowing the wrong ones to drift away. Here we see another layer. Not everyone who comes close to you is someone who should remain in your life. Some come close because they recognize the light in you, and the light in themselves is calling out. But others come close because they want to use that light to cover their own darkness, not to learn how to face it. I share this not so that we live in suspicion or close ourselves off from the world, but so that we gently become more aware of relationships that leave us depleted while showing no growth from either side. This is often a sign that you are giving more than you truly have, and the other person is taking more than they are willing to take responsibility for within themselves. The beautiful thing is this: when you realize this, you do not need to hate or condemn the toxic people who once entered your life. You only need to restore your boundaries. You can step back, not because they are evil, but because you now understand that the light within you is something you must protect, not something others are entitled to possess or drain. And from that distance, if they truly wish to heal, they will be forced to turn inward and face their own soul, where every true process begins. And if they only wish to continue clinging to external lights, they will find someone else to repeat the same cycle. In the end, I learned a lesson Jung always emphasized. In many different ways, the journey back to the self is a personal one. No one can walk it for anyone else. Your Urano matter, how strong, has no mission to save anyone. It has only one true purpose: to honestly reflect the extent to which you have dared to live truthfully with yourself. Those who resonate with that frequency will stay. Those who do not will leave, or appear only as a lesson. And so, instead of hating the toxic people who were once drawn into my life, I choose to see them as mirrors that remind me each time I allow someone to drain the light within me is a moment when I must return to Jung, return to the shadow, to the self, to the simple yet profound question: right now, am I being truthful with myself? After months of learning to reestablish boundaries with those who were drawn to my light in unhealthy ways, I began to notice something subtler, gentler yet so profound that it made me stop for a long time. There are beings who recognize you before any grown adult ever does. I am not talking about people who have gone through deep healing, nor sensitive or introspective souls. I am speaking of something far more primordial, a fundamental energy field that only children and animals seem able to sense first. I cannot count how many times I have witnessed this: a child I have never met before, tightly clinging to a parent or relative, suddenly relaxes when I step closer, reaches out a small hand, or looks at me with unmistakable clarity in their eyes, or a cat that is wary of everyone, yet comes over to sit beside me as if we had known each other in a previous life. Moments like these make me ask myself, why do they react this way? And I remember what Jung wrote in The Archetypes and the collective unconscious. The psyche is not of today. Its ancestry goes back many millions of years. Perhaps children and animals respond like this, not because I am special, but because an aura, when it becomes consistent, touches the primal layer of the psyche that still lives in every being. There is no logic there, no defenses, no social masks. There is only one question: is this energy safe? And they answer with instinct. I once asked a friend who works in psychotherapy about this. She smiled gently and said, "Children and animals don't care what job you have, how successful you are, or how you present yourself. They sense your real energy." It sounded simple, but something very deep resonated in me, because that means the most primal part of the world recognizes you before the grown-up part of the world has time to put on its masks. And this naturally connects to the next experience that I gradually had to face. One that is more difficult the more peaceful you become. The more those who are not at peace feel threatened by you. I remember very clearly the first time I realized this. I was in a phase of living very slowly, spending much time with my inner world, facing my shadow. I no longer reacted strongly to criticism as I once did, no longer tried to prove anything. There was a new stillness in me, like the surface of a lake after the rain. But what surprised me was this: the quieter I became, the more restless some people felt around me. I said nothing. I did nothing. I simply existed. And yet, they felt as if they were being seen through. I thought about this for a long time, until I reread a line from Jung. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And I realized it is not your stillness that unsettles them. It is the chaos within them, echoing inside that stillness, that unsettles them. For those who have not yet faced themselves, your peace becomes a mirror, not a mirror of beauty, but a mirror of truth. They do not see you as threatening. They see their own unhealed parts beginning to stir. I once experienced a relationship where every time I remained calm, they grew anxious. Every time I fell silent, they felt abandoned. Every time I spoke gently, they interpreted it as invisible judgment. I did not understand it then. Now I do. I was not activating their fear. The fear had already been there for a long time. I merely caused it to echo. And this can make those who are not at peace respond in two ways. Either they avoid you, or they attack you. Not because you are wrong, but because your peace makes their unrest unbearably visible. On the other hand, for souls who are on the path of returning to truth, your stillness becomes a place where they can finally breathe. I have met strangers who, after only 5 minutes, said, "Being around you feels comforting." But I have also met people who, after just 10 minutes, said, "I don't know why, but I feel uncomfortable." The same aura, the same presence, yet two completely different reactions. And then I came to understand those who are living in alignment with themselves will not fear your energy. Those who are running from themselves will. The more deeply I understood this, the less I blamed myself, the less I blamed life. I began to see every reaction from others as an echo of their own being, not as a judgment of my worth. When children come near you, it is not praise. When animals trust you, it does not mean you are special. When someone avoids you, it is not because you are at fault. When someone feels threatened by you, it does not mean you are dangerous. All of it is simply the natural response of the nervous system and the unconscious human mind to a kind of energy they are not yet accustomed to facing. And from here, I connect this back to the entire journey of aura we have walked from part 1 until now, when you become more truthful with yourself. Your aura does not only affect others through words, actions, or eye contact that touches deeper layers, where reason has no time to react, where truth is recognized before it is understood. And I think, to some extent, this is both the gift and the challenge of those who are walking the path back to the self. A strong aura does not make you a blazing light in the world. It makes you a small candle, but a real one. Real, and because it is real, it cannot be denied. Children see it. Animals see it. Those who are at peace see it. Those who are not at peace also see it, but each group, each soul, sees you through a different face of their own being. And from that, you come to understand something simple yet profound. You cannot control who will feel safe or who will feel threatened by your presence. You can only continue returning to your true self. The only part you can ever be responsible for. As I gradually understood that there are things that recognize us even before human reason does, like the gaze of a child, the gentle nudge of a cat's head, or the way an anxious person suddenly feels short of breath in the face of your calm. I realized that the journey of aura was never truly a story about how brightly you shine in the eyes of others. It has always been a story about this, whether you still need the eyes of others to feel that you are allowed to exist. And from here, the path leads to one final sign, very quiet, yet profoundly deep, the moment you no longer live for approval. I spent many years of my life asking for permission to be myself, without even realizing that was what I was doing. Asking for permission by trying to be pleasant, by not speaking too deeply, by not asking strange questions, by not revealing too much emotion. Asking for permission by smiling when I didn't want to smile, nodding when I didn't agree, staying in relationships that were already exhausting because I was afraid of making others sad, asking for permission by shrinking myself, stepping more softly, and comforting myself with the thought, it's better this way, so I can fit in. In Jung's language, I was living for a very long time inside the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted by society. And every time I chose the mask over my true nature, my aura was cut into smaller fragments. I could be liked, but I did not feel truly seen. Perhaps you have felt this too, a room full of people, yet deep inside, a profound loneliness. Then one day, not because I read some lofty philosophy, but simply because I was too tired, I began, little by little, to set down my need to be approved of. Not in rebellion, not with the attitude of, I don't care anymore, but with a gentle release. If I have to trade my soul for someone else's approval, perhaps the price is too high. I remembered the words Jung once wrote, words that had echoed in me many times. Yet only in certain moments did they truly open a door. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The greatest privilege of a human life is not to be liked by everyone, but to become the person you were born to be, to live fully inside this skin, this story, this soul, no matter how unlike any mold it may be. When I began to allow myself to do that, very slowly, I started to notice a few changes. I no longer tried to please everyone in the room. I no longer forced myself to rescue awkward conversations with awkward laughter. I no longer tried to prove that I deserved a place in someone's life by giving until I was exhausted. I still loved. I still cared. I still listened, but not from the fear that if I didn't, I would be abandoned. A new stillness appeared. If someone wants to leave, they may leave. If a relationship only survives when I keep shrinking myself, that relationship no longer fits the new version of me. I realized that when you no longer use approval as the oxygen you breathe. Your aura changes its nature. It is no longer a fragile light dependent on who praises you today, who criticizes you, who affirms you, who turns away. It becomes a light that arises from within, from having met yourself in the darkness, from having embraced both the lovable and the unlovable parts of who you are, and from having stopped trying to prove yourself. From that point on, you become difficult to control, not because you grow rigid or defiant, but because no one can use your fear of rejection to manipulate you anymore. People may disagree. They may not like you. They may voice their opinions. But deep inside, you are no longer the trembling child standing at the door, holding a piece of paper that reads, "Please accept me." You understand this your right to exist was granted the moment you entered this life. No one has the authority to issue that permission, and no one has the authority to take it away. Of course, not everyone feels comfortable at this point. Those who are accustomed to controlling others through guilt, through silence, through criticism, through giving, and then withdrawing affection, will find you very difficult to use. The old buttons on their control panel no longer work the way they used to. Those who only feel safe when others depend on them will perceive your inner freedom as a threat. They cannot control a person who no longer lives by fear and in systems built on pretense. You simply, by being yourself, have already become an uncomfortable question. If one person can live without acting a role, then why do we have to keep acting? In the end, a strong aura is not the kind of thing that makes everyone turn to look when you enter a room because of how you appear. It is the thing that allows you to be alone without feeling empty. It is the ability to sit in silence without rushing for your phone. It is walking beside someone without urgently needing to prove your worth. I realized that as the noise inside me quieted, I no longer asked so often, "Do they like me?" Instead, the question slowly transformed into, "Am I being truthful to myself in this moment?" And strangely enough, when I began to live by that second question, the right people naturally found their way to me. Those who could not endure the truth drifted away. Those who needed me only as an energy source to cling to no longer felt compatible with me, and those who were gentle, deep, and real, though few, remained for a long time in peace. If we connect all the previous parts from understanding what aura is, understanding shadow, understanding projection, understanding others' reactions, understanding awakened archetypes, understanding changes in environments, understanding why the restless feel threatened by youth, and this final sign becomes the point where everything converges. When you no longer need approval, your aura no longer revolves around the question, "Who am I in their eyes?" It turns instead toward a single question, "Who am I in my own eyes?" And there, I believe, is where Jung wanted us to meet ourselves, not at dazzling peaks, but in a very quiet night, where you can place a hand on your chest and softly say, "I may not be perfect. I may still be full of contradictions. But from today on, I allow myself to be myself." Your aura is not something you need to display. It is the freedom you build in silence, little by little. And whether the world is accustomed to it or not, the journey back to yourself is always worth a lifetime. Before you drift into sleep, remember that everything you seek outside of yourself is gently opening its eyes from within you. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Tonight, let those words remain beside you like a small candle in the darkness. No need to try, no need to become anyone else. Just return. And if this journey has touched you, leave a small signa like a comment, or even just a single word so that I may know you, too, are awakening in your own way. Wishing you a deeply peaceful night.